We're preparing a new border today on Pots and Trowels, and that's brought to you with the support of Cobra Garden and Darlac. Hello and welcome to Pots and Trowels. Well, we're outside in the front garden today and I'm going to do some work on preparing a new border. If you remember, a few weeks ago we dug up a mature shrub. It was a hibiscus. This is it, and we moved it from in the lawn where it was in the wrong place and leaning, and we planted it in the border here. And if you want to see that video on how to dig up mature shrubs and move them successfully, you can find that video of course on YouTube. Just search for Pots and Trowels, subscribe for free and tick the little bell icon, and then you'll get a reminder of all the new videos that we do. And this is it. As you can see, it's in the existing border there, which is very narrow, and what we want to do is to get a bit more depth to this border so that when we come to plant it in spring and early summer with a mixture of some low growing shrubs, ground cover and perennials that will give us colour all through the season, we need more depth. That's less than a metre, and we want it to be at least 1.5 metres all the way along, so we can get those different layers of planting. So really easy to do, and it's a good job to do in the winter to prepare the ground and get it in good condition for that spring and summer planting. So what I've done to start with, very simple, I've measured it and I've put in my string line just here. So a nice tight string line, and that's really important, that if you're going to be cutting a new edge, the string line needs to be tight. If it moves around too much, then when you cut the line, the chances are you're going to veer off and have a curve. And a little tip, if you're doing a long run, and you can see how this is going to work, there's actually a curve in the border here that will have to be turfed in when we come to do the final one. But just here, Jill, before you wander off too far with that camera, because this is going to be a long string line, I'm using a few tent pegs just to push them down, because otherwise it would move. So if you push a tent peg down and hold it down, that just stops that string line moving. So a little top tip for you there. We need to cut a straight edge with this. Now the ideal tool to do this is what we call a half moon edging iron. This is a brand new one. It's never been used because I broke my other one. It snapped off there. This is a new one, and it's half moon, and it's great for cutting through turf. If you haven't got one of those, don't worry, you can still cut with a spade, but this makes a better job because it's got a flat blade. So it's worth having if you're doing any work in the garden. So I've got my string line. Now I'm going to have to put my back to you now, because I'm going to cut from this side and I'm going to push it into the string line, and the string line will be my guide, and I'm going to use my foot, and it's just a case of push it in, lift it, push it in, lift it, and that is just cutting through, and I'm using that string line as a guide, nice and easy, so we get a straight edge. So I'm going to work my way to the end of the line, and then I'll show you how we lift the turf. Right, so what I've done now is I've cut down the main string line to get the straight edge of the front of the border, and then I've cut at right angles in because I want to lift this turf. You could dig it in if you want to, but digging it in, you only cause problems because the weeds will grow if it's got perennial weeds in the grass, and when you come to plant, if it hasn't rotted down, you're bringing it to the surface all the time, and it takes a while. So I'm going to lift this turf, so that's why I've cut it into strips to make that easier. Now you can use a spade for this. Try and get one that's as flat as possible, especially if you want to reuse the turf for patching in. I will do in this piece, for example, to straighten the border out. Oh, it's great for repairs around the garden, so don't get rid of it unless you have to. And what we're going to try and do is just skim it off like that, about 1 inch thick with the spade, as you can see. So I've now got that piece of turf, and I'm just going to put those on the grass, and then I'll take them away, and it's quite easy. And because we're only cutting that 6 to 8 inches until we get the next cut, it makes it quite easy to slice through it. So that's a really good way to do it. Now I'm going to show you another piece of equipment here, another tool, because this one You probably haven't got one of these because it's not something you'd have every day in the garden, but this is what we call a turfing iron or a turfing float. And this is ancient. This tool is far older than me. I actually used this as an apprentice gardener when I was 16 to lift turf, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get this when the parks department I worked on closed down, and I was given this. So this is probably 70, 80 years old. Really good tool. You can still buy them. So if you do a lot of turfing, it's worth investing in one of these, or look out for them at second-hand shops, that type of thing. And this is flat and it just glides along. As you can see, that's going to be the action, and I'm just going to slice through that. And because this one is an old one and it's been used so much, it's nice and thin. You can lift it, put your piece of turf down and just work your way down the row, and it makes the job so much easier. So I'm going to have a happy 2 or 3 minutes slicing through this turf like cutting through butter. So I've now lifted all the turf, and you can see now we've got the start of what's going to be the shape of the border. So what I've got to do now is to get this soil in the right condition so we can plant it in the spring. So obviously the ground is quite firm because it's had a lawn on it for a long time. So what I need to do is I'm using a fork rather than digging it. I'm just going to fork it and loosen it. It's good soil. There's plenty of worms in there. I can see the worms, so it looks good soil. So it's a case of going in as deep as I can this first time, just to loosen it. I'm going to get a few tree roots from probably, and if we do, we'll take those out. We can always chop those out. I'll pull them out with the spade in a second. So I'm just going to work those loose. So I'm going to work my way right the way through the border. As I say, roots like that can come out, but the main thing is, you probably notice here, what was the existing border, I've got a problem with a weed, and this is called ground elder, which is a spreading weed. And there's a bit I've just dug up. If I get it out my trug here, I dug this up from another part of the garden where it's growing under a hedge, and because it's protected, it's actually started to grow. And you can see here, it gets the name ground elder because it looks like an elder leaf there, the elderflower shrub, and it spreads by these underground roots. Now the good thing about them is they don't go particularly deep. They probably don't grow any deeper than about 10 centimetres or 4 inches. But the problem is if you chop through with a spade and leave a little piece in like that, that will regenerate and make a new plant. So what I've got to do here, and you can see there's quite a bit, I'm going to get the fork and just loosen those out, and we need to pick all of those out. If we leave them in, the problem is just going to get even worse. And even though I'm going to spend quite a bit of time getting those out, I can guarantee that once this is planted in the spring, up this will pop. So the fact though that we'll have loosened it all and the soil's been cultivated, it will make it easier to control moving forward. So I'm just going to have to spend some time forking through this border, loosening the soil, breaking it up a little bit and picking out all of these little bits. And these of course do not go on the compost heap, because these will just certainly grow and make even more plants. So we've got to get rid of those, either dry them out, burn them, or get rid of them in your recycling bin, but not in the compost bin. So time to go and put the kettle on, make a cuppa, come back in a few minutes. So there you go, I've done about 4 square meters there. It's quite hard going because you're digging quite deep and you've got to get rid of all those roots. So don't overdo it. The last thing you want to do is do too much and then collapse with exhaustion. I'm at that funny age now. So I've dug it about a spade's or fork's depth. I've taken out quite a lot of root and the roots there from the ground elder. There will still be some in there, I can guarantee that, but I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. What I'm going to do next is to put some compost on, and this is compost that we made in the old garden. It's grass cuttings and leaves and all the vegetable waste, rotted down really well. It's still quite bulky, which is great. And what I'm going to do is just scatter that over there, because that will really help to improve this soil. It's quite good soil anyway, looking at it, but if we can increase the organic matter content, that will help to open it up even more for when we plant the roots. It will help to retain moisture and nutrients, so when we do put some fertilizer on the spring, the humus that will have developed in this soil will hang on to those nutrients for longer, and it will make the soil far more fertile and really healthy soil. So I'm putting on probably just a scattering all over, maybe an inch or so over it. I'm not going to dig that in. I'm going to leave that over winter. It's a little bit rough. The frost we get in late winter will help to break down any clay bits of soil in there, and the worms will get active now. They will start to pull that in and mix it in. If you really wanted to, you could just tickle it in a little bit, but I think leaving it on the surface is absolutely fine. And what we'll do with that in the spring before we plant is I will fork through it one more time, because I can guarantee there will be still some roots in there. So that's the stage we get to for now. Obviously I've got more to do, but one last thing, we want to create a nice edge, because when this is planted we will be edging the lawn. So I'm just going to use my half moon edging spade, and I'm just going to throw the edge back a little bit like that. It just means that we've got a definite edge, and there you go, just found a little bit more of the root there. So it's just a case of just pushing it in. We've already cut down anyway, but it's just good to use this straight edge and just throw that back so that it doesn't spill out over the lawn, and that just tidies it up a little bit, brush any soil away, and that is it. So I'm going to leave that, and then over the next several weeks I shall gradually work my way up until I get to the other end of the lawn, and then we'll come back to this probably April time and we'll do some planting. Alright, well that's enough for one day. Time now for a cup of tea and a sit down. And remember, you can watch everything we've done on YouTube, and we'll be back with you again next week. I'm going to show you how to take some blackcurrant cuttings, so we'll see you then. Bye.